Okay, gents, are you feeling angry? Do you feel something bubbling inside of you? I was thinking like what would be a dramatic way to intro this topic, and that now I just sound creepy.
Yeah,
Um,
a little bit.
Yeah, you better keep going. Let's see if you can pull this one out, Murman.
Welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am your it is really early in the morning. I am your host, Chris Murman. Making fun of me already is Andy Cleff. Hello,
You make
Andy,
it quite easy.
and Andrew Leff.
Good morning.
Jay Hershko may or may not be joining as we keep going. Um, we're back for another sin, gentlemen. We have some sin in our hands, and I forget who suggested it, but I am a fan of it. We are going to talk about wrath. So
Wrath.
yeah, which is funny because uh you're two of the least angry people that I know, which will be funny to have this conversation.
We will channel
Uh,
Khan and the wrath
yeah.
of Khan.
Wait, y'all, that was a nerdier reference than what I did. um okay, so Left, you had the genius idea of introducing the definitions as we were get going. So would you like to give us a brief intro into wrath for our audience?
Yeah, so wrath, right? And I think it's funny you said two of the least angry people. Maybe I just hide it well. Wrath, one of two noun. Wrath, chiefly British wrath, cinnamon of wrath, cinnamon. Oh my gosh. Synonyms of wrath. Okay. Strong, vengeful anger or indignation. I can't speak this morning. Punishment for an offense or crime. Of off. Edit.
No,
Right.
keep it, keep it.
Leave it in, leave it in, leave it in. The Wikipedia entry that I pulled up, I thought the interesting part is the neutral act of anger becomes the sin of wrath when it is directed against an innocent person, when it is unduly strong or long lasting, or when it desires excessive punishment. If anger reaches the point of a deliberate desire to kill or seriously wound a neighbor, it is gravely against charity. It is a mortal sin.
Well, that last sentence, killer. Where does it show? Where did pun intended? So I'm thinking, where does it show up in our world?
um,
Vengeance, retribution, injury, wrong.
I mean, is it too obvious to say social media?
Social media is huge. Social attacks, accusations, blaming, shaming. Yep.
War of the I mean the framework wars of the 2010s.
Yeah, it shows up at work too, right? Like, I mean, we see it a lot of times across Agile teams that are, you have somebody that brought someone up and brought something up in retro and could easily use that as a weapon to attack at a future date or took offense to something and just didn't feel comfortable speaking up. So I think we probably see this in all different shapes and forms. And, if we want to jump into it, silence can be a point of aggression too. Like now I'm going to lay in the cut, right? I'm going to lay in the, hide in the bushes until my moment arises.
I think we also see it at review, whether it's a team iteration review or integration review, where there is a stakeholder that chimes in like, "You bunch of morons, right? Why the hell did you build that? How or the postmortem? How could you make such a mistake?" So retros, reviews, and wrath. The maybe we have to respell put W's in front of retros and reviews when they go off the rail.
What if we slightly shifted wrath to just be like, I feel like outrage is a um maybe a slight step below wrath. Is that like, so what if we say outrage is part of this conversation? That's, I mean, that's outrage is when the true cornucopia of our human nature, especially in the work of the last decade that we all of us have had, like that's definitely in play, right?
Yeah, I
I'm
think that's.
wondering,
Go ahead, Andy.
I think outrage is probably one click below vengeance, but it can easily turn into vengeance, with the things that Leff talked about, right? You push it down until it explodes.
Yeah.
Where were you going, Andrew?
I was going somewhere similar in the sense of I think outrage is kind of a product of wrath, right? So it's kind of that emotion, that drive to be self-serving,
Yeah.
but what are you willing to do in the wake of that self-service, right? Like, are you going to take a good path, a bad path, right? How are you going to either lift people up to walk with you, or are you going to step all over everyone to get to where you need to get to, where you think you need to get to? So I think, yeah,
I
it's
was just trying to put it in terms where people could maybe more apply it to like every day. It was kind of I had to take some stretches with gluttony just a little bit, but I actually, and then once we get going with gluttony, I found it that easier to find analogies or likes into. So I don't know. I guess I was just trying to like fit wrath more into every day of what we see.
I always go back to my childhood, right? Like if I did something wrong, you're going to feel the wrath of your father, right?
Mm.
Like you're going to get the. So that to me is a very raw emotion. And I don't think that emotion as we age, excuse me, changes. So I think it's dug deep into us. So when we're at work and we feel that we have a conflict, is that the trigger that's pulled, right? Like I'm going to get in trouble, so I'm going to go into a very defensive stance, right? Because I'm going to feel the wrath of somebody. So even though that wrath might just be, I'm upset with you, can we hear? So I'm taking a different side of wrath is like, how do we listen to it? How do we hear it? And how do we respond to it when we're experiencing it, right? Is it us being little kids, or is this an adult behavior that, what bad happens? I always ask the people that I work with, um, they're always like, "Oh, I'm sorry, this and that," and I'm like, "I've never, I've never given you a hard time for this, right? Like, I appreciate this, and you're sick. I don't want you working, 15 hours a day. You need to take a rest, and it's too much. Oh, I'm going to get in trouble by whom, right? Who is this ghost role that we're all afraid of that we're going to get the wrath from?"
There's scar tissue that, I mean, you described your childhood experience with your father. The dysfunctional method is to layer procedures, policies, process as a protective against the wrath of your father. You told me I needed to be back by 10. I'm back by 10, but I'm shit-faced drunk. That wasn't part of the policy, right? And so the lack of accountability that, Chris, you and I talked about org debt a while back. And
Right.
I think that is a reaction, a protective reaction to, well, I don't want the wrath of that VP. I followed the process. I am not going to be in trouble here. Um,
So
that's the dysfunctional way of dealing with wrath.
yeah, it's so funny to hear you both discuss the the like you're immediately connecting with the aftermath of wrath. And I'm not speaking incorrectly, but like it I just find it interesting that because when you all were talking, I always think of, I was raised in the church, and there's very like wrath is a very Old Testament sort of, when you think of like the way that the Old Testament sort of describes the higher power. Hey, like this dude gets angry. This dude flooded the earth. This dude like firebombed a city. You know what I mean? Like this is like anger getting to a certain point and having those ramifications is what you're describing. I like I'm still trying to figure out like is it a personal thing that where it comes from? Is there something that the system that we could look at systematically that stirs that wrath? Is it just human nature?
So
I'm kind of looking more to like shift the conversation left just slightly.
before we go there, help me unpack what you just brought up. Divine wrath,
Right.
and is that separate from human wrath? Are they different things? God's wrath is okay because, well, we deserved it.
So
Human wrath is a sin. I
you're
unpack. I didn't go to church enough.
no. Now, all right, now you're getting to like one of my hot button issues, which is like it's okay for one person for one party to be angry, but not party for both, right? Like, hey, you know, Safe came in and did all this stuff and made all these things, and look at the mess it made. Like, aren't you angry about that? And then you choose to be like, well, I mean, I can be angry about some stuff, but like, do I have to be angry about that? And it's like, well, why not? Why? And then you get angry that they're not angry, kind of a thing. It's like it spawns itself. It seems like it's a misery loves company sort of divinity to it to make my wrath okay. Other people need no. Other people like, hey, did you not hear what the signatories of the manifesto said about scaling and how it can bring on the plagues and locusts and stuff? Like they said that, like, like what, why are we, don't you see that? Like it seems like it's begging you to join me in my wrath. That's where the
Mm.
divinity comes from. Does that make sense, Andy?
After another cup of coffee, it probably will.
What are you talking about? I the fact that people need to be outraged and like have that be the outpouring of their wrath, it's like, well, we need to be angry at something. Like my team's not working the way it's supposed to be. My career may not be working the way it's supposed to be. The organization is pushing on me in ways that it's not supposed to be, or whatever, right? Like it's got to be somebody else's fault.
That's avoidance of accountability, and it's
Yeah, I know.
fear of mistake, and
You're
it
right.
and it leads to arthritis in an
I'm stretching.
organization.
You're right. I'm just
And so yes, it happens, and yes, it's human patterns. I'm curious, is it time to go into the counters of it? This is Leff, your approach, right? Okay, so wrath is a counterproductive anti-pattern. It exposes the possibility that there's wiring gone bad, or policies that are outdated, and the counter is, let's talk about it. Let, the process for improving the process may be the counter to organizational as well as individual wrath. Like, great, bring your anger. Good. Now let's direct it in a healthy way.
mm. What is the
Yeah.
left? What is the line between passion and taking it too far into like anger or wrath?
I used to I've worked with a lot of passionate people, me being one of them. And I think that's been a blessing and a curse in my career because it's been looked at as anger, where I have seen it as passion. And it's taken me many of years to understand the difference in how you show up. So maybe that's kind of it. When you're feeling you're going to bring the wrath towards somebody or a group, maybe it's the maturity needed to know how to use it, right? And to dip my toe into what you just said, Andy, it's how are we taking that information and doing something with it other than using it as a stick, right, to hit people with? So, or an organization, are we mad at the right things? Right? Are we mad at the people that are doing what they think they should be, or should we be mad at the process that we've asked them to do? Right? So how do we kind of look at those signals and look at I hate this term, but the bigger picture of everything and understand that, maybe wrath can be used in a better way, right? As opposed to being the little kid that's getting yelled at for doing something wrong or coming home drunk, even though they were on time.
I think it's a signal. I anywhere on the continuum of displeasure or passion, displeasure, anger, wrath, there are signals there that something in the system is not balanced.
Well, if you've got people that are around you that you've built that equity with, right? Like we've all been on coaching teams where the folks that I'm there with, they know that I can get tuned up when we get on this topic and I get on my soapbox. And so when my passion kicks in, they're seeing the passion come out and they're like, see, client, like listen to him. Like he's going on something that like, just give him a minute. Right. Because they know that that's passion coming out. Right. If you don't have that equity, that time built in it, they don't know that that's what's coming out of you is passion. And maybe we default a bit to anger or wrath a little too quickly sometimes because we want, especially in the US, we want a polite office. We want a polite work culture. Polite, right? And so
Where
sometimes
you work?
what?
Where do you work?
As a general
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chris, knowing you well, knowing your passion, I would add that you also show up with a great deal of compassion.
it
Those two
certainly should
together
go that way too.
have to be huge, right? You can show up with passion and no patience and bulldoze, one of my things that I'm working on. But combining passion with compassion. But it takes patience because not everybody is able or willing to move at the same pace. Curious how you handle that.
It's challenging
Yeah.
to orient yourself, Leff, in a way that says, I have to make sure that my passion comes out in a positive way. Because that's what I heard Andy just say is like, your passion should come out in support of people, not also against systems and things that pressure you, right? Like you have to know where you're putting it, right?
It's there's so much here to unpack, but yes, and right. So a quote that resonated with me is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? So taking
Love it.
that approach from the balance of, okay, I'm a passionate person, but I'm also passionate about caring for people. I think too, people aren't always easy to accept the care, right? Because there's like, well, I don't, why are you doing this, right? Like, what's in it for you? And that is a tough thing to kind of break down as well. So sometimes they're waiting for the wrath of something bad to happen because I care about you. I'm here to help. Oh, great. What's in it for you? So I think that too is, go ahead, Andy.
And it's not necessarily your behavioral history with them, it's
Yep.
their behavior history with their entire past. Right.
Yep.
And you aren't always able to read that unless they share openly. I had some issues with my dad and his anger, and it turned into outrage and wrath and punishment.
Yeah.
And
I had
I'm triggered right now by the words you use, Leff, and you had no idea because you sound just like my dad. Uh,
I
as a
I
story, unless we have that openness
Yeah,
and trust to share with each other, you don't know what someone else's triggering
absolutely.
mechanism is.
just on Friday, I had someone kind of snap back when I was trying to cover some metrics that we were going to be working with teams on, and one of the scrum masters kind of snapped back at me, and I pulled this person over to the side afterwards and was like, "Hey, where did that come from?" It's like I thought you were giving us something extra, something new to spend our time on, and she's like, and I've already had all this other stuff. She goes, I've had 5 managers over the last 12 months. Like, again, we weren't talking about that, but the fact that that came out in that conversation, hey, she's had a bunch of people barking at her a lot of ways. My bald butt coming in and saying, hey, here's something new to consider, like was the last thing
She needed. Yeah.
that person needed. And you don't know that. You don't know any of that crap that, and it's almost as if when someone does snap at you, you should get curious to find out why, because that's not at you. Like, you didn't do anything to hurt that person. You just happen to be having a professional conversation, and here comes a wave of, here's all the conversations I've had for the last month that have frustrated the hell out of me. Would you like to hear about it, Murman? And then we get to listen, right?
And it's
It's
trust and safety that is built in
yeah.
those connections. However, in today's fast-paced world of, zoom in, zoom out, got another meeting, do we take the time to do that, to connect as humans? Do we have that passion and connectivity, or are we just fully transactional?
That's a big question. Unfortunately, I think since post COVID, it feels more transactional. Everyone feels a little more withdrawn. Um, just maybe because we've been working remotely for so long that we've kind of, I joke about it. I go into the office now and I feel like I'm at a subway station or a train station, right? There's just people walking around. I don't know anybody. Everyone's getting ready to do something, whether it's get to a meeting, get to their desk. There's no interaction, right? I don't hear people talking on the floor. So I think there is some of that fatigue across all of the industries, right? Just around how do we bring people back together? And I feel like as coaches, right, this is something we aggravate people with, right? It's kind of like maybe I hate the religious references, but in church, like, does everyone really like shaking hands and hugging? Right, in church, like it feels like an activity that nah, I'm good,
Ah,
right? So how do we kind of be different in a presence where we're not kind of carrying this,
Mm,
wrath can be a weight, and either waiting for the wrath of somebody or waiting to give the wrath to somebody, I think can be a real kind of point of friction that is tough to carry around. And you said it, I think, before we started recording, Andy, the pressure, it's got to, basically the sponge is full. We have to like wring it out at some point. So how do we kind of know when how to release that pressure at some point and not directionally at one person because you're having a bad day? Wow, I got dumped on all day. I'm going to take the wrath out on you, right? Because you're my target now because you're in front of me.
yeah.
right.
It's crazy.
I so this is our fourth deadly sin, and we're not. It's not like we haven't stumbled upon this already in the conversation, but it's clear that there are feelings that can be channeled in positive ways that when they just reach an extreme amount of pressure level in our life, right? A desire to enjoy, like the last thing we talked about is just enjoying something good. You know what I mean? Like gluttony did not start from this stuff tastes like shit. Please, can I get more of it? Right? No, it's
Try
good.
it.
It's goodness, right? Passion that, like, it is good to have you want people like that. When y'all are talking about your favorite teams you've ever been on, or you're designing the perfect team, like you're not putting dispassionate in that descriptive list, right? Like nobody
Right.
wants a group of automatons just like walking in, shuffling in, like Leff's office apparently feels like right now. Um, like you do want that. It's just you have to know where that line is before that emotion, that feeling hits the extreme level, before you start redlining with the, what is it left? The RPMs? Is that on a car? Yes. Car does
Yes,
vroom
yes,
vroom. Okay.
yes.
All right. I played dumb. Just
But I think too, I'm kind of jumping back around here, but organizational wrath, right? The wrath of an organization. So I'm trying to take a different kind of thought path here as far as return to office. It kind of sparked something in my head, right? If you, at least in a lot of organizations, they're asking people to return to office,
Right.
and you have to return to office a certain amount of days per week. Now, that tells me that there's a list out there that they're generating to see how many days a week people are returning to office. So, organizational wrath, right? Now there's an additional pressure to do something that we believe is not really valuable, right? So, if you work in an office, yet no one that you work with is in that same physical office, why are you right? So it just feels like, well, now I'm getting the wrath of my organization because they have debt that they want to, be able to justify on the books for real estate. This is a tough topic. I have to say, like, wrath feels like such a raw emotion that it just feels like it's tough to, like, we could go so many places with wrath, and the almost the Stockholm syndrome that wrath can create, where you
Mm.
almost fall in love with your captor, right? Like, you're falling in love with the wrath because you're getting acknowledged, right? Sometimes bad news is, like, a bad reaction is a reaction. So am I getting attention?
Well,
So you could
hold on, Leff.
go ahead.
All right. So why don't you pronate out on the couch for a second? Because when I think of wrath, it doesn't strike me the same way. That's not a negative emotion that I would say I identify with a lot. So why is it that way for you?
It's just the way it's been used in my world has been as a extremely negative approach, right? You're going to get the wrath of God. You do that wrong, and the wrath of God is going to. So that kind of thinking is where my head automatically goes with wrath. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, the same. And when we did the definitions up front, it is punishment or retribution for something you did wrong, vengeance. So by that definition, it's not something desirable in my book. Passion, anger, okay, but by the time it crosses over to wrath, bad. And so let's go backwards. You did something wrong. Well, great. It was an experiment. Did you fail fast and cheap, or was it expensive? Did you follow the process and it still went wrong? Well, then you have no accountability. That's not what we're going for here, right? With creative knowledge work, it is fail fast and cheap, turn on a dime for a dime. And so there is no room for wrath about making a mistake as long as you learn something and you
And
propagate that learning.
yeah, I think too, we're also good at saying that, but when push comes to shove, when you have a angered emotion, are we good at executing that, right? Like, not attacking somebody first. So when you're full of passion and you're feeling that anger, evoke, like, starting to bubble up, do we take the time to pause, right, and not react? I try to do this at home a lot, right, with kids and so forth. Like, it's instant, right? You do something I've told you 1,000 times. Why the F are you doing that again? We've talked about this, right? Companies are the same, right? Why did you do that again? We've talked about this. We've talked into accountability. So how are we using that emotion not to attack somebody and re-embed that or open that scar?
There's a difference, though, I think, in the relationship. You and your offspring, there's at some point a parent-child relationship, adult-child relationship that sooner or later becomes adult-adult. I don't know which kid you're talking about and how old they are. The problem for me is when the organization assumes the role of adult and everybody else is a child, and then they need to be managed, supervised, etc. And when they screw
That's
up,
good.
where here comes the wrath.
Yeah,
I'll take it one
that's
step
good.
further. The organization doesn't take the role of parent, they take the role of God. So here's what I heard both of you describing. I didn't hear you describing wrath as a thing to experience poorly. You both described a fear of wrath. Now, again, there were some allusions to other parts of our lives and stuff where that comes from. So I totally understand that, because I was trying to figure out, like, but I don't experience like wrath that way. But when you brought up like fear of wrath, like reprisal, like if we look at wrath from the sense of like layoffs and like the turmoil that we're under and such, like that's a different kinds of thing. Like being afraid of something happening to you that hasn't happened yet, that's an anxiety that we all experience, you know? And that's what I mean, that's what I heard y'all describing. It's really crazy how you can be afraid of something that hasn't actually happened because you've experienced it at other organizations or you've heard stories about it or whatnot, right?
But it can also be experienced, right? What the hell were you thinking? You absolute moron. How could you have made that choice? Well, it seemed like a good idea given the information I had. Go
But see,
back to
that's
the
not
prime
right.
directive of Norm Kurth, right? Everybody's doing the best they can.
Okay.
When wrath comes in, it's like, no, you're a moron. That's not good enough. We're going to release you to the world of gainful employment search.
It's
I mean,
not
that's
it's
the
not a sin
reality that happens.
talking. Like that's fun.
I I
Sorry.
love, yeah, no, I this conversation's hit me in a weird way. I love the analogy around what both you said, parent child, right? When the organization becomes your parent, or Chris, the dogma of an organization. And I think too, I used to say this all the time with earlier on in my career, I worked for some pretty abusive organizations and some, I should say, abusive people. So I used to say all the time, I would never let my parents talk to me this way. Why on earth am I letting my boss talk to me like this? And that's for those that can't see the video, Chris was just doing the money sign, right? And it is, right? So our livelihood is held differently by the people that like capitalism, right? Pay. So we are allowing ourselves to lower our self standard, right? Our standard due to the wrath of money, right? Money has a wrath to it. So what are we willing to do in the wake of the money wrath to lower our standards of just being human? So we see it quite a bit in corporate America, unfortunately. And I think that's part of the organizational resistance towards what we do for a living, right? We talk a lot about theories and emotion, and that's something that has been an anemic quality in corporate America for so long because you weren't allowed to go there. Now the pendulum has swung the other way, and I'm not sure we're ready to deal with the level of emotion of real people, right? We're no longer just punching in and punching out of a clock. We're real people now. And I think our voices get louder. And I feel like the wrath of organizations has tempered down a bit, but it's more subtle now. There's a subtlety about it. It almost feels like the pendulum is about to swing back in the other direction.
Like wrathful passive aggression.
Sure.
It's
Sure. I'm
very
sure
it, it's
that's a
very
thing.
it's very passive wrath if it is just because it's we don't want to make news, right? We don't want to get on social media for the wrong things. But by the way, here's 5,000 jobs, you know,
Yeah.
bye-bye. Oh, our agile roles aren't delivering anymore. Well, we'll just send all the scrum masters away, right?
And,
Or
and it's interesting too. I was sitting in a retro the other day and facilitating, and it's the same things, right? It's the same kind of things that you hear, no matter what team, what industry. I don't know what my role is, right? Or this person isn't doing enough, or that person is too noisy, like too direct, so they shut the rest. So again, wrath at scale, right? How are we looking? So wrath at scale versus wrath at the team. I mean, it's unbelievable kind of how we can weave in and out of this with just one word, right? This
Yeah.
word has meaning to so differently for all three of us on the call. Can you imagine scaling that now? That feeling of emotion that we just experienced across tens of thousands of people, that's insane. That's massive, right? And we do nothing with it. Not we as a collective, but organizations, they really just want to avoid the friction of that situation, right? It's too hot. It's too close to the fire.
They want to avoid it yet they don't want to counter it. So they would rather it not be mentioned, not brought on the table. In past episodes, Leff, you always brought into the mix, what is the heavenly virtue that counters this sin?
Yeah.
What is the heavenly virtue that counters wrath?
I think to me, I don't know if there's a heavenly virtue, you could say kindness,
Well,
caring.
temperance is probably, have not being so wildly swinging, right? Be very temperate with your, being a little more measured as opposed to flying off the handle.
Yes. The way I would answer that, Andy, is how do we be, and you've heard me say this, I think, on every episode of this so far. How do you be in relationship with wrath and use it in a way that can invoke something different other than fear, right? And also, I think fear can be a driver, right? I don't think we should shy away from creating fear. It's how we create that fear, right? The fear should be, well, I'm going to let my team down because I had half my commitments escape a sprint, right? Not fear that I'm going to get in trouble by management for a bad metric. So what's the fear of not being accountable for the things I said I would do? I think the fear should come from within and not just experience, I'm going to get yelled at. I'm going to get in trouble, right? I'm going to get the wrath of somebody because I didn't do that. So I would like to challenge the audience, around being in, again, like through all the deadly sin conversations or all the sin conversations, how are you in relationship with that sin and using that emotion to do something different with it, right? How are we pushing ourselves? And that's the way it starts. It's so cheesy, but one person at a time. If we can get enough people to try and do that, you can shift culture in a different way, because I think we're talking about it differently. You can't solve wrath, but you can certainly be in relationship with it differently than you are today.
Left's email signature says, "I'm always angry." That's basically what he just said is like, hey, I can dial it up whenever I feel like it.
So a quick goofy story, right? One of our fellow coaches, I won't say his name, but
You know who
when
you're
he
playing.
gets angry, it's a beautiful thing to watch. I've never seen anybody become more laser focused with the most eloquent way of speaking and just can absolutely eviscerate you in a matter of like 10 minutes with words. There is such it when you say people are in the zone or locked in, this is exactly the moment. I can see it with him. It happens instantly it's unbelievable. It is the most amazing. So how do we use that feeling of that rush and kind of get a moment of clarity and see things differently and not just see red and literally, pull, oh, I shouldn't say that term, but basically, just napalm the room, right? So I think it's just a matter of how are we using these emotions for a different result, right? Like not just a weapon to constantly put the pressure on people to do something that we think is right. So the dogma of it, right? Whether it's the parent, I'm still stuck on the parent. I love that metaphor. I'm gonna figure something out about that. The organization becomes your parent, and we all become the children of that parent. So I think that's spot on. Why are you laughing at me now?
Just having a conversation with yourself over there. You're right. I like that. Yes, Leff. What you said was good. I am very much a fan of what I said earlier.
Hey, I'm trying over here. Still, I haven't had enough coffee.
No,
It's been.
It's in the morning, and I mean, you're right. We did get a little more esoteric than I had like the previous sins have been discussed very practically, and I mean, there's something deeper with this one for sure. Certainly with you two. You
It's
experience
early in the
wrath in a way
day.
that I was like, oh, this will be a fun chat. Like, no, not for
You never
everybody.
know where they go. You
Not for
never know where they
everybody.
go.
Okay. So we have 3 sins left. Again, how did wrath come across to you all? Where did we miss the situations where wrath could be used? Also, your friends that need to hear this, just feel free to forward it on to them. You know who you are.
Or you'll
Andy,
get the wrath of Chris.
yeah, no, I'm not the person that that they need to be worried about. It's the tattooed person below me in the Zoom. Andy, closing thought.
I'll quote one of my favorite bands: "Compassion is a virtue, but I don't have the time." We're in such a hurry to get to the next Zoom meeting. We often forget to show up with passion. That compassion has to come with our passion.
Great quote.
What about you, Leff? Any final? Do you want to quote a band?
I'm fresh out of quotes for today, but I'm sure I'll have some later. But no, I think this has been an interesting conversation. I didn't think it would go this route either, but let us know how wrath shows up for you. So I'm curious about this one. I think we're going to get some interesting responses. Hopefully we do.
He's Cleff, he's Leff, I'm Murm. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you, everybody.
Cheers.